Sailing down the Baltic with a wreck my voice of deal, cruising in the channel where the steamers never yield, beating down the biscuit with the crew they had no meals. She's the mighty sailing ship, the Herzogin Cecilie, Herzogin Cecilie, Herzogin Cecilie. She's the mighty sailing ship, the Herzogin Cecilie. As far back as 1896, the North German Lloyd Line decided to run its own sail training ships. Even then, the sailing ship was disappearing, and as the German regulations still insisted on sail experience before granting a master's certificate, there was the possibility of a shortage of the type of officer which the line wanted for its big fleet. The Grand Duke of Oldenburg interested himself in the idea from the first and was made the president of the scheme. The sailing ship Albert Rickmers, a fine vessel of 2,581 tons, was bought and refitted as the training ship Herzogin Sophie Charlotte and began her work in 1900. So successful was she that the company decided to build a second ship designed for training purposes. Accordingly, the Rickmers yard at Bremerhaven, a firm which had great experience in building as well as running big sailing ships, was commissioned to build the Herzogin Cecilie, which was launched in 1902. The Herzogin Cecilie, nicknamed the Duchess because she was named after the German crown princess Duchess Cecilie and carried a romantic carving of her as a figurehead, was originally a steel four-masted barque with a gross tonnage of 3,242. She was 334 feet 8 inches long, with a breadth of 46 feet 3 inches and a draft of 24 feet 2 inches. Although a big cargo carrier, she was given accommodation for a large number of cadets, the poop being carried from right aft to forward of the mainmast, where there was only a short well deck between it and the forecastle. She was lofty and heavily sparred, even the royal mast being of steel, with large sails and not a single reef point in the whole sail plan. This design made her a difficult ship to work, but she was intended to carry so many cadets that there was no apprehension on that score. She was not fitted with any labor-saving devices, such as brace or halyard winches, as were most German ships. When she was new, her captain had under him 4 mates, 2 instructor officers, a surgeon, a purser, a boatswain, a few paid hands, and about 60 cadets, strong youngsters ranging from about 19 to 22 years of age. With this crew, labor-saving devices were not necessary, but under the Finnish flag, she sailed with a crew of about 25, on one occasion as few as 19, and she was what the old sailormen would describe as a proper workhouse. Under the North German Lloyd, cadets paid a premium of about £40 a year for their keep and tuition, and some of the finest lads in the country applied for admission. They did practically all the work of the ship, only a few paid hands being shipped to act as stewards and the like. Cadets were rated as able-bodied seamen in their 3rd year. The number of cadets on board and the careful system of instruction permitted them to receive a theoretical as well as a practical training. Moreover, the fact that she could carry well over 4,000 tons of cargo and was fitted with steam winches for working it permitted them to have a thorough experience of that side of sailorizing as well. Having finished their 3 years in the Herzogin Cecilie and passed a stiff examination, they were signed on by the North German Lloyd as 4th officers of their steamers and, barring accidents, stayed under the flag for the remainder of their career. The ship remained in this training service until the First World War, carrying cargo of all kinds and making some quite creditable passages. Outwards, she generally carried a cargo of German manufactured goods. Homeward, she carried a bulk cargo, sometimes nitrates from the west coast of South America, sometimes grain from San Francisco or Australia. She made one passage from Caleta Buena to Falmouth in 99 days, one from Beachy Head to Adelaide in 78 and another from Mejillones to the Isles of Scilly in 63 days. She left Bremerhaven in May 1914 and arrived at Guayacan to load nitrates just before war broke out. That being a neutral port, she prepared to remain there until the end of the war, but before the armistice was moved up to Coquimbo. After the armistice, she was allotted to the French, but they already had more sailing ships than they needed and had recently decided to end the subsidy scheme which encouraged the building and running of sailing tonnage. She went to Antofagasta to be fitted for her return to Europe, although there was little wrong with her after her long stay in tropical ports. It was not until October 1920 that she finally sailed for Ostend, making a good passage, but striking the quay wall when she arrived and loosened both anchors and chains. There she was laid up pending the arrival of a purchaser. At that time, Captain Gustav Erikson, a Finnish master mariner, was building up what was later to become the biggest fleet of sailing ships in the world. He had sent his Commodore master, Captain Ruben de Clou of the Low Hill, down to Marseille to inspect the former German sailing ship Passat, which was offered for sale at £11,000. By chance, Captain de Clou called at Ostend on his way and there saw the Herzogin Cecilie offered for £4,000. He inspected her thoroughly with a critical eye, found her to be in perfect condition and did not trouble to go on to Marseille, buying her on the spot. A rival Finnish owner had examined her shortly before, but had decided not to bid for her, fearing that she would require too many men and would be too costly to run. Instead, he bought the four-masted barquentine Mozart for the same price, a ship which was specially designed to be run with as few men as possible. The Herzogin Cecilie proved to be the more profitable ship, and while the Mozart has had to go to the scrappers, the former was still in first-class condition and had many years of life in her. Captain Erikson was delighted with his bargain and, knowing her previous history, determined to keep her fitted as a training ship to give as many Finnish lads as possible a chance of learning seaways. So successful was this scheme that he put several of his other big sailing ships to the same purpose. He provided practically the only chance of sail training to a large number of lads of all nations: Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, Estonian, German and British. Captain de Clou was put in command of her at Ostend, a fine sailor and a wholehearted enthusiast in the training of boys. He was then 36 years old and has commanded big sailing ships for about 5 years. Regarded by many as the best all-around sailing ship master under the Finnish flag, he had got a good passage out of his previous command, the Low Hill, which was not built for speed. Her first charter under the Finnish flag was to carry a cargo of timber from Fredrikstad to Melbourne in the summer of 1922. Outward she made a passage of 92 days, although meeting a terrific gale a few hundred miles from her destination, which put 2 steamers ashore and delayed her for a week. Unable to find a cargo in Australia, she left in ballast for Tal Tal in Chile, making a smart passage of 35 days and keeping up an average of 14 knots for a considerable time. She brought home nitrate and went out again to Chile, making a 99 days passage from Caleta Buena to Falmouth by way of Fayal. She was on the Pacific coast again in 1924, but at the beginning of 1925 she sailed for Australia, made an intermediate run from Port Lincoln to Callao and back. In February 1926, she sailed from Port Lincoln to Falmouth for orders with grain. The South Australian grain business, which was beginning to be the only opportunity for the big sailing ship, suited her, and she had been on it ever since. The homeward passage of the grain fleet has been made a race which attracts great attention, and the Herzogin Cecilie has made for herself an excellent reputation on it. In 1927, under Captain de Clue, she arrived at Queenstown 88 days out of Port Lincoln, the first ship home out of 13, and recording the best time in the year. Even before Gustav Erikson took over, Herzogin Cecilie had a reputation for being a fast and seaworthy ship. She could reach speeds of up to 21 knots and had won the races no less than 4 times before 1921. Under Erikson's ownership, the success story continued. She won the grain race 4 times in 11 trips from 1926 to 1936. In 1928, Herzogin Cecilie covered Port Lincoln to Falmouth and won a race against the Swedish ship Beatrice. The famous writer and adventurer Alan Villiers was on board, which would result in his book Falmouth for Orders, and later a trip aboard the barque Parma. In 1936, the Duchess started what was to be her last voyage and her last grain race. From Port Lincoln in Australia to Falmouth took her just 86 days, comfortably beating her nearest rival, the Pommern, by 7 whole days. Her orders at Falmouth were to proceed to Ipswich to discharge her cargo of grain, but 2 days later, early on the morning of the 25th of January, in thick fog and rough seas, the Herzogin Cecilie struck the Hemstone Rock and drifted onto the cliffs of Bald Head on the South Devon coast, just a few miles from Salcombe. Hauled in the forepeak, the ship pounded fiercely, then settled by her head with her well decks awash. When dawn broke, just about everybody and his aunt had turned up to view the wreck, and quite a lot thought that they should also go on board. This considerably hampered the rescue operation, but in the end, the Salcombe lifeboat took off 22 of the crew, leaving just the captain, his wife and 6 crew members. A breeches buoy was rigged up to take off all the luggage and personal belongings, but most of this was quickly stolen when it landed by members of the public, who had by now degenerated into something of a mob. For 7 weeks, the Herzogin Cecilie lay stranded on the Hemstone whilst her 4,500 tons of grain rotted and fermented. The stench was appalling, and fears of it polluting the beaches around Salcombe kept the owner and the local council arguing fit to bust. Every day, huge crowds gathered to view the Duchess, and local farmers made a fortune charging people to cross their land for a better look. Eventually, the grain became so swollen that it started to crack the decks, and this seemed to galvanize the salvage attempts. By the 7th of June, enough of her rotting cargo had been removed to allow the installation of powerful pumps, and on each high tide, tugs repeatedly attempted to pull her off. At first it looked as if the Duchess was stuck fast, but finally, on the 19th of June, the Herzogin Cecilie floated clear of the Hemstone. The local council still would not let her to be towed into Salcombe, fearing all manner of disease, so in the end the Duchess was beached in Starhole Bay, just at the entrance to the harbour. Unfortunately, what appeared to be a safe sandy bottom concealed rocks, and in the July gales she broke her back and her masts soon tumbled down into the sea. It was the beginning of the end. Ironically, if the Salcombe authorities had allowed her into harbour, she would have been saved and loaded and on her way long before the gales came. As it was, the thing that the council feared most happened. The grain washed out of the wreck and fetched up on all the beaches. However, it didn't cause any pollution because the seagulls ate most of it, and the rest got washed away. In the ensuing months, All the fittings were stripped from the wreck, the beautiful figurehead sent to a museum in Finland, and the remains sold to a local scrap merchant for the princely sum of £225. A sorry end for a marvelous ship. She's run upon the Baltic in the midst a test of steel. She's hard aground so but the rocks have broken her keel. The deck planks of the Duchess your feet will never more feel. She was the mighty sailing ship, the Herzogin Cecilie.